about most common challenges you might face when implementing the measures, some essential steps to readiness, and also explore some of the best practices to meet the key requirements that are relevant, not just for PCI DSS, but also other privacy and data protection regulations such as GDPR, for example. We have two esteemed experts in the field who bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to the table. It's my pleasure to introduce Andras Chair. Andras is Vice President, Principal Analyst at Forrester Research in area of security and risk management. He's focusing on identity and access management, cloud compliance, and fraud prevention. So welcome, Andras. Great to have you join us today. We also have Felix Rosbach. Felix is Head of Product Management at Comforte. He drives the product strategy of data security solutions and is familiar with many customer implementations where the main driver was compliance with PCI DSS. Welcome, Felix. Hi.
Hi.
So before we start, I'd like to highlight for the audience that you can use chat window to ask any questions that you might have, and we will also cover them then at the end of the session in our Q&A. So without further ado, let's kick off the discussion and start with some general overview. So Andras, I would like to point the first question to you. So could you please provide us with a brief overview of the new version of PCI DSS? So sure. What are the key objectives, key changes, or updates in the latest version?
Sure. So first of all, this is it just seems like a really kind of small change, like in a new version, but in reality, there's really big differences between previous versions of PCI DSS, right? Between the previous 3.2.1 and 4.0, the most current version. So namely, let me kind of give you just at a very high level what we see here. So there's a lot of increased focus on cloud and service providers, right? So it's not just the organization itself that needs to kind of pass the audit or be compliant with PCI DSS, but also its suppliers, especially cloud, cloud computing infrastructure, as well as service providers. There is definitely, so that's number one. Number two, I would say a lot of expansion of scope, right, of requirements, right? There's a lot more areas, right, in out there. I'm going to talk about those things in more detail as well. But identity governance and roles and responsibilities, penetration testing, vulnerability scanning, authentication, customer authentication data, and its management, key management, and really a lot of kind of requirements that are actually beyond the scope of just PANs, right? Like personal account numbers and credit card number storage, right? So that's, I think there's that thing that is just really astoundingly huge here. There's also an emphasis on risk-based approach. So it's not a kind of one size fits all, but the organization should do the risk assessment and understand the biggest threat vectors, and responses should be prioritized to again look at those threat vectors. So that would be number three. And I would also say continuous monitoring and testing is probably number four, right, out there. So it's basically better response to hacks and data breaches, bigger scope, much bigger scope in my assessment. It is basically a focus on cloud and service providers, and it's a risk-based approach, right? That is basically a continual process.
Very cool. Thank you for that summary. So as a follow-up question, maybe also to you, Andras, what are actually the potential consequences or risks if organizations fail to meet these requirements on time, which is, as we said, like March?
So basically, sure. So I mean, I would also almost say that meeting these requirements, in their entirety and without prioritization is really difficult, if not impossible. So basically, it's an assessment that every organization needs to do, and then making sure that you have a challenge, problems, or issues or findings, right, in a prioritized kind of way, and then you start working at those things, right? So some of the risks, right, are clearly, there's always typical. The most direct consequence is basically just fines and sanctions, right? That's number one. If you don't do them, the thing is you have to do them, so that will mean more money spent on labor costs, implementation, tools, etc. You may have to make some organizational changes internally. There's a lot of kind of mention here on RACI charts, right, in the new PCI DSS. So basically having a much better role-based access control of responsibilities internally, right? So there may be some organization changes. So if you don't do it, more penalties, more audit findings, audit, sanctions, and all that. If you basically, and obviously as a result of these audit findings, you might also run into the very kind of unlikely case of being, losing business or not being able to, kind of process cards for a period of time, which is obviously catastrophic at its nature to any kind of business these days, right? In our digital remote e-commerce kind of world, right? But if you do it right, and most organizations will have to do it that process cards, there's going to be a spike in money spent on implementation tools, labor, as well as probably some organizational changes, right? Because of the additional focus on responsibilities here.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Felix, you engage with many customers as well, so maybe you can share what are some common challenges you see them facing basically when trying to achieve and maintain compliance with PCI DSS in general.
I mean, it really depends on the organization, on the nature of the organization, on the size of the organization. So kind of if you go to a retailer or a kind of bank, those have usually a set of different challenges. One thing that often comes up is the complexity of the environments. So basically, yeah, PCI 4.0 comes with a lot of new regulations or new requirements, and you need to now look, okay, where do I have to change my technology? We have to change my processes. We have to change my policies. And especially in the financial services industry, you see a lot of traditional applications, legacy applications being in place, which oftentimes are really hard to change. You have a hard time if you want to kind of adjust a certain measure or bring in a certain new capability to protect the data, for example. And that is a challenge for organizations out there if they kind of are now looking at the new requirements coming with 4.0. Another aspect that we oftentimes see is, that kind of with the change of the requirements, you also need to rethink how you tackle those kind of regulational dependencies or requirements that you have, because certain tools you have in place right now that goes across the entire spectrum, right? They might not be sufficient for those new requirements, or they might not kind of be compatible to other tools that you need to bring in, which is basically a cascade, right? You end up in the worst case, you end up in not only needing to replace that specific thing, but a couple more things. So PCI 4.0 compliance becomes a project that is not kind of just checkbox exercise, but really something that needs to be considered across the IT department, across the compliance team. And that is, of course, a challenge for some organizations.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it sounds very complex. So maybe Andras, back to you. Besides that complexity and that serious effort that needs to be put into place to achieve the compliance, let's ignore that just for a second, basically, and talk a bit about the positive effects. So what are the benefits for organizations who implement all those measures? I mean, just beyond that compliance, of course, with the standard itself.
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, like with all things, all big changes, right? Or kind of something that just happens without you being asked whether you want it to happen or not, right? This is one of those cases where kind of colloquially, we say, if it does not kill you, it only makes you stronger, right? So basically, better security posture usually is the outcome of all these changes, right? Most you know, of these regulatory requirements, right? And PCI DSS 4.0 requirements make a lot of sense, right? It's basically these are things that should have been done, you know, as proactive measures for, you know, at organizations, right? Like looking at privileged identity management, looking at identities, looking at least privilege or zero trust access, you know, securing not only card data and encrypting all this, but, you know, focusing on account takeovers, really looking at things like multi-factor authentication, malware scans, you know, privileged identity management, device inspections, and then on the log review side, log aggregation, log understandings, failure detection, vulnerability scanning, pen testing, and the list goes on and on, right? There's a lot of things here. So these things really, you know, should have been done anyway, right? Or should be done anyway. So basically, one positive thing is that a lot of projects that an organization had to postpone or push out continually and say, hey, we don't have money or time for this, you know, nobody requires this. Now it's required, and you have to do it and find the budget for it. So basically, this is a situation where the regulator basically almost speeds up or accelerates the implementation timeline of certain projects. There will be waivers, there will be exceptions, there will be, you know, some, you know, kind of basically implementation differences between various organizations. But, you know, overall, the result of meeting these types of regulatory requirements is just basically bringing the security level and data protection level at an organization to, you know, a much better kind of level, right? And then obviously beyond this, just, you know, passing other regulatory requirements can come in, right? So if your organization is subject to SOC 2 Type 2 or ISO 27001 or 2, or, you know, COVID, COSO, HIPAA, GLB, and there's a lot of 3- and 4-letter acronyms, right? There's also country-specific ones in data protection. You know, most of these standards, right, also require the same or at least very similar things, right? So it's just, if you pass PCI DSS, that will, and you implement these additional, you know, kind of layers of security that I just highlighted, that this comes in handy, and there's a useful set of measures and implementations and changes for passing other types of, you know, compliance requirements, right? So that's another, you know, thing there. And then really, as with anything, like long-term automation of security yields lower labor costs, right? So that's definitely a better thing. Higher level of security, better security posture. I thought about this, and believe it or not, if you're able to focus on failure management and focus on basically penetration testing, that means that ultimately the uptime and the availability of the environment and how things really work, you know, that are customer facing, will be prone to fewer attacks, right? And also to fewer downtime kind of threats, right? So the result is that if an organization implements these types of measures, that usually results also in an uptime improvement and also like a predictability improvement of the organization, which invariably will result in better customer experience and better customer kind of retention rate. So that's another area, right, that people sometimes don't clearly think about, and they say, oh my God, this is just a purely kind of regulatory back office thing. It is not only that, right? It's basically like a comprehensive set of measures that will absolutely have an impact on building a positive customer experience and better customer retention, lower attrition, and basically, you know, better bottom line, right, and profits, really.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very, very important topic, a very important point to highlight, that sometimes these kind of regulations have overlapping requirements that can help with many different things, right? Not just complexity that you should see behind it. So maybe like continuing with you, Adrash. So when speaking with your clients, or from your perspective, what would be the essential steps that you would recommend to get ready on time and meet the deadline?
Yeah.
What should companies, you know, start doing immediately?
So I'd say, like with a lot of other things, most organizations we see have like all these responsibilities, that are listed in various PCI sections, right? Kind of scattered around the company, right, and then the organization. So it's not necessarily always one department. Like in the poor compliance people, they just kind of chase after these stakeholders and owners, right? But in reality, you don't have like everything sitting in one bucket, right? That all is centralized and managed, efficiently. So the first thing that we would recommend is kind of think about your governance, right? Think about your responsibilities, the who does what, that thing. There may be a need for changes in the organization to be able to match or meet these requirements in PCI DSS. Like I said, every single section here, in the changes, right, really talks about roles and responsibilities, right? So that's basically the first thing, the human element, the organizational element that really kind of has to be thought of. And then after that, thinking about how you maintain a posture in terms of the organizational readiness of the company to be able to kind of continually meet PCI DSS regulations, right? So it's basically you got to make some changes, and you got to make some of these changes in such a way that the result is basically able to, the resulting organization is able to actually keep compliance with the PCI DSS 4.0 and future versions. Right? The next thing that I would say that is basically a fairly new set of requirements, and this is kind of falls in my coverage area, the very much direct coverage area, is identity and access management and customer identity and access management. So being able to authenticate people well, and in a way that is industrial strength and utilize preferably passwordless authentication, right, and also two-factor authentication. So this would mean either using a mobile authenticator application, sending a one-time passcode or a one-time use link via SMS text messages or emails, or a mobile application back channel notification to the client is definitely important. And then kind of making sure that the company is slowly but surely moving away from passwords, right? So passwords have run their course. You have to kind of move beyond them. They're very much vulnerable, phishable, spoofable, replayable, and all the problems around them. And then the other aspect is privileged identity management. So basically, who has access to these core systems that process cardholder data and authentication, and under what circumstances is very important, right? So using a privileged identity management tool like a BeyondTrust, CyberArk, Delinea, and others, for managing controlled access for admin users to these systems is important. So it's not like every admin has, unfettered continual access to all resources, but you have to actually make sure that you're able to kind of control and govern access. I would also add that looking over any kind of data governance processes, who owns what data, structured and unstructured, is definitely important internally. Obviously, the scope and the kind of target of PCI DSS is predominantly cardholder, credit card data, but it also covers, basically SAD, secure authentication data as well. So basically, the passwords also need to be managed. So that data governance is the third thing. And then obviously looking at encryption mechanisms in key management, how this is taking place, updating those systems, updating the access policies in key management systems. So if you're using like a hardware security module, HSM, or any kind of a tokenization tool, how that tokenization tool is being accessed, what are the privileges, how you manage the user life cycles, admin and business user life cycles is clearly important. And longer term, I would also add preparing for cryptographic agility, which means the pluggable nature of cryptographic algorithms in all your commercial tools on in-house built systems, that enables an organization to get ready for post-quantum computer kind of encryption methods, is definitely important. So quantum computers will likely be able to crack all current asymmetrical key kind of encryption methods, and you have to get ready for basically new algorithms, right? So using this PCI DSS update for that kind of reason as well, and hitting two birds with one stone can be an interesting kind of budget generator exercise. So yeah, these are the probably the things: governance, roles, identity, data governance, and encryption key management, as well as cryptographic agility.
Okay, cool, thank you. So do you see like anything that you would like to share like as a best practices, basically, in particularly when it comes to data security, of course?
I would say that really beyond the RACI charts, beyond the organizational fit, right? In essence, you have to maintain a really strong and robust data security sets of measures, right? So this boils down to, first of all, discovering the data, right? And there's probably going to be more here. Obviously PCI DSS is very much card data focused, but there can be some access rights discovery that can also be discovery of non-card data that's non-card holder related, but maybe also privacy related or other sensitive data, personal identifiable information. We've seen organizations, as I said, the whole passwords, if you still have those, or any authentication credentials that are being stored are kind of in the crosshairs of PCI DSS updates, right? So you got to understand where all this data lives in your environment, and this may include on-premises systems as well as cloud-based, cloud infrastructure, as well as software as a service kinds of applications, and understand the priorities, right? So in a small organization, it's relatively simple. In a larger organization, you really have to write down all these things in an Excel spreadsheet or a database or a piece of paper, right? And do some kind of set up some criteria for the prioritization and the sensitivity of the data, and basically be able to rearrange the order how you want to protect things, right? I would also argue that rehauling or updating any kind of encryption you might have, or understanding what you have, and then making plans about rehaul is important. So any kind of key management tools, like any bring your own key or hold your own key kinds of environments, right, are things to be aware of, right? If you have DLP, data leak prevention, data loss protection types of tools, both for on-prem environments and the cloud, those kind of can provide a relatively decent way to protect against things along the lines of attacks, right? And really data exfiltration, mainly accidentally. I mean, a seasoned fraudster or seasoned data hacker will know how to bypass DLP, at least partially bypass it, but by using encryption, tokenization on their part, or really just changing characters in some rotational fashion in data, right? But for the inadvertent disclosure of data by somebody wanting to process a spreadsheet on grandma's computer over the weekend, right, that DLP absolutely is a good protective measure. SaaS applications, right, and getting an inventory and governance and security posture management of SaaS applications is absolutely an important element. There's a lot of SaaS apps out there that may be kind of tied to other SaaS apps, and you kind of have to understand all this. And infrastructure as a service, or cloud infrastructure like AWS, Azure, GCP type of coverage is also very important. Being able to scan those data instances and using some kind of data security posture management tool is important. And then lastly, a few other things like the application security posture and understanding, via software bill of materials and scanning application security processes, what kind of libraries and what kind of algorithms you have in your tools, and kind of having an overall understanding of the kind of basically tool chain that was used in these environments and the libraries being deployed is definitely important. And then identity lifecycle data security. So basically using some kind of an onboarding joiner mover deeper process for all the admins and business users internally who can process the data. So that's definitely important. And also for customers, consumers, right? So if I always tell organizations in retail that most companies only allow a user to actually create an account and store a card number there, right? But does the organization allow like a basically a direct way for the customer to click on a button that I want to delete my account and basically delete the payment form card that I actually added to this account, right? Is this available? Because if it isn't, you should definitely implement it. That's just allows a customer to actively retire or delete their account, and that absolutely helps with the data retention as well as as a consequence PCI DSS types of problems as well. And then the other element, right, that's an adjacency in an interesting area is privacy. I don't really have, I don't really cover privacy in depth. We have a lot of research analysts on our team that do. But basically, privacy is all about, users controlling what kind of data the organization can or cannot collect about them. Tying and integrating privacy programs with the PCI DSS data security, data governance types of processes, I would say is a very kind of synergistic process. And again, like with like a regulatory kind of force, privacy is also under a lot of regulations, which are not optional exercises. So basically, privacy implementations also bring budget, money, euros, dollars to implementing the PCI DSS changes. So in a nutshell, I would say this. So racially charged data discovery and prioritization, rehauling encryption, DLP, looking at the cloud, SaaS apps, cloud infrastructure, understanding app security, software bill of materials, understanding the identity lifecycle on admin and business users for data, who has access to what level of data, and using privacy as a kind of springboard to kind of get budget are probably the things that I can think of in terms of best practices.
Great, thank you. So you touched a couple of points there that I think are very important. So let's get a little bit of Felix now. His perspective. I think the good question now would be to discuss, and I think Andras, you mentioned it a little bit, but maybe Felix, you can expand a little bit about this sustainability of compliance, which means, how can I ensure that all the measures that I implement right now will remain also effective and future-proof, especially having in mind, the evolving cybersecurity threats and regulatory changes. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think kind of one of the cool things of PCI 4.0 is that it brings more of the cybersecurity best practices to PCI, meaning see it as a continuous process, right? See it as something that you constantly have to adjust to a changing threat landscape, to a changing technology landscape. And that is a challenge, of course, but is the only way forward, because we need to make sure that our security is as fluid, is as flexible as the environment we are building for our products, for our customers, basically. And that is one thing that will be a challenge, definitely, but it is also something that moves PCI much more forward towards something that kind of actually ensures the security of those environments in a continuous fashion. For organizations, if we look at best practices here, I think kind of that change, that mindset shift to see it as a continuous process requires you to have the skill set to really identify, is that a solution that is still valid or is it not? And one of the other aspects and goals of PCI 4.0 that is kind of changing somehow is the flexibility in what solutions you can use to achieve a certain goal or to fulfill a certain requirement, which is great. Awesome, we have that flexibility, but for that kind of to make use of that flexibility, you need to have that skill set in-house. You need to have that expertise in-house to understand, okay, this is the challenge we want to solve. This is the solutions available on the market, or the concepts, the technologies that I can kind of bring in here to solve that solution. And that is something, where you need to, if you want to be kind of future-proof, if you want to be sustainable, you need to develop that kind of skill set, that mindset in your organization. What we see being very effective out there is kind of also how you look at those different requirements in terms of order. For example, if you focus on data security, so sounds obvious, right? PCI DSS is a data security standard. You should focus on data security. But in which order means there's a lot of kind of different things you can do to safeguard the data, ranging from perimeter to actually looking at the data. And what we've seen being successful is that organizations which focus on the data first and identify where's the data flowing, understanding their data landscape, kind of look also on the problem through a different lens, basically seeing, okay, maybe there are systems we can keep out of scope, systems where we don't need to send the data, systems that don't need to necessarily store or process payment cardholder information. Starting with that first, reducing the scope first, and then looking at the additional measures to protect the systems where you actually need the sensitive data to be stored or processed on, gives you a completely different starting point, a completely different scope of the entire project. And that is something that we've seen being very successful at the customer side. There's one other kind of thing that I wanted to bring in, which is kind of shifting left when it comes to data security and compliance, moving things upstream. So I found it pretty funny. Andras mentioned kind of the crypto agility. I'm part of a working group here in Germany. We define kind of the crypto agility topic. We kind of look what is the state of the art technology out there and bringing that together. One thing that we discovered and that we want to make really clear when we publish that report is the fact that the vendors upstream need to embed and ensure that there is that agility. You can't, as an end user organization, do all of that as an afterthought. And the same is with PCI compliance. Talk to the vendors of your solutions, of your payment solutions, of your environments, and try to make sure that they already have that on their radar. Find a solution together, and kind of, I'm really happy in that regard that we kind of just secured a partnership with ACI, and ACI solving that problem for their customers on a global scale, and really tackling that problem in their solution together with us, so that the customers have an easier time to then achieve PCI compliance. So that's kind of something I think will change the market, will shape the market. If we can shift left a little bit, let the vendors do some of the work, we will reduce the burden on the end user organizations, basically.
Very cool. Thank you. Felix, you mentioned one thing, you mentioned project scope. So I would be interested, you know, PCI considers, of course, any entity, any system that stores, processes, transmits card data to be in scope. So from your experience in working with customers, are there ways, and what are the possible ways to reduce that scope and simplify that whole process a bit?
Absolutely. So looking at it from a data perspective, if you can protect the data in a certain fashion, making sure that the data is protected wherever it travels, wherever it resides, basically, you can reduce the scope by, for example, keeping entire systems or entire landscapes out of scope by only running on protected data. That's one of the experiences we have made with a kind of larger retailer in the United States. What they were able to do is they could kind of even put entire stores out of scope by letting them only process protected, tokenized information. One of the kind of big topics in PCI DSS, especially 4.0, is tokenization as a solution to protect the data in those environments. And that kind of not only reduces the audit scope, of course, I mean, that's a very favorable thing to happen, right? You can keep those systems out of scope. On the other hand, if you look at it from a data security perspective, and Andras really kind of made a good comment there, we are not only caring about the audit and the compliance and the checkbox. What we really want to achieve is actually protecting the data of our customers, right? I mean, there's a lot of other benefits you get from that beyond the pure compliance. And if you think about that, keeping those systems out of scope also means in those systems there is no sensitive data. The risk of a breach is reduced drastically, right? And that kind of is also a very beneficial exercise to do. Yeah.
Very cool. So I think also Andras mentioned that a little bit, but maybe you can provide also your perspective on that. So how does PCI DSS align with other data protection or privacy regulations, such as GDPR, for example, or CCPA, or you name it? In the meantime, there are a lot of privacy regulations, right? So which measures can help address multiple privacy and security regulations or standards without doing additional investments? So can you please, like Felix, provide a bit your perspective on that as well? Felix?
So is it Felix or Andras first? So
whoever likes that. Let's do it like that. Whoever wants to.
I'll go first, right? Just to kind of clear that out of the way, right? So usually the data encryption requirements are very similar. Key management requirements are very similar across all these standards. The identity onboarding, identity zero trust, least privilege access is usually very similar. And the monitoring of systems, right? The log monitoring, breach identification, failure identification is very. These are kind of elements of other programs, right? That we've seen, in others, other routines or other standards as well.
Absolutely. And from my perspective, there's an overlap, definitely, right? So a lot of the data that is payment card data and transactional account data basically is also considered privacy or private kind of information, yeah. And those regulations such as GDPR cover also that kind of information. Of course, looking at that from a bigger compliance perspective, what you want to do definitely is you want to understand what are the overlaps, what are the differences. For example, when it comes to the obligation to disclose a breach, you have different authorities you need to reach out to when it comes to the privacy regulations, GDPR or kind of CCPA, for example. Whereas with PCI, you have other obligations such as informing the card networks, for example, such as informing the customers, the end customers. So understanding the overlap as well as the differences is very important, and then kind of making sure that you use the overlap to your favor by looking for solutions that cover the bigger ground, that cover both regulations in essence, right? So especially again, if we look at data security, if we look at the data itself, there's a lot of overlap that you can cover with certain solutions where the privacy regulations as well as PCI say, okay, this is an appropriate measure. Same is for the access control, same as for data minimization, which in essence you could call reducing audit scope, because if you minimize the data from a privacy perspective, you also can reduce the audit scope by if you do it right. So those overlaps are really key to save costs and to ensure that you don't have to run multiple solutions for essentially achieving the same result in the end.
Yeah, cool, thank you. So before being able to protect this data, right, you need to first identify it, right? So what do you see kind of as the main challenges, Felix, this is for you, that organizations are facing when trying to discover and classify that sensitive data, particularly when we talk about, large complex IT infrastructures such as payment systems or card holder data environments?
What we see out there is a spectrum of maturity. Some organizations do data discovery and classification in a very manual, very spreadsheet fashion. Some use external third-party services to kind of audit their systems to understand which systems contain which data. On the other end of the spectrum, you have more automated continuous scanning. You have data discovery and classification that is much more advanced to that. And kind of course, using those more advanced tools brings a lot of benefits, ranging from understanding the changing landscape, understanding where payment card data, for example, is moving, understanding if there's unknown places that you didn't have on your radar, that not could only become a challenge when it comes to an audit and they come up and pop up in that situation, but also from an actual security and risk perspective, where we have seen out there in the news organizations having S3 buckets, Amazon buckets, containing millions of records accidentally unprotected without any measures around them, which is definitely a huge problem. And having a good data discovery and classification solution at hand helps you to identify those places and mitigate the risk effectively. I think there's another aspect here, which is also again the sustainability and the kind of complexity when it comes to the regulations. So it's not only your IT environment that changes and you need to keep an eye on that, it's also the regulation landscape, especially if you bring in privacy, if you bring in changing requirements, and having a single solution that also lists you, hey, there's a PCI problem, hey, there's a GDPR problem. That is very, very helpful for the teams who have a lot of other things on their plate, oftentimes, right? When we think about those topics from a theoretical perspective, awesome, we can solve all of this, but you need to have the right automation and tools in place to save the resources and time for those teams so they can work effectively. And with the limited resources in IT, security teams, compliance teams, this is absolutely essential.
Great, thank you very much. I mean, probably, you know, we could talk for 3 hours here, but we don't have enough time now. We are actually already over time. So I would like to use the rest of the time just to see if we have any questions. I think, you know, discussion so far was very useful to me, at least, and I hope our audience finds it valuable as well. So yeah, let's see if we have any questions coming in. Yeah, so the first questions we have here is, from our experience, tokenization projects can become very complex. What are you making different? I think this is something for you, Felix. So Felix, Can you take this one?
Yeah, okay. So first of all, any cybersecurity project is oftentimes a complex project because you need to understand what you want to achieve. You need to understand kind of which technology you are using to achieve a certain kind of state, a new state, a certain secure state. And that really requires a good understanding of your landscape again, and requires a good understanding of the data you want to protect, which is the homework you need to do anyway for PCI compliance. It's nothing you can come around. PCI compliance in itself is something that comes with some complexity, right? The good thing when it comes to tokenization and modern, the new generation of tokenization tools out there is that you have much faster integration capabilities, and also you lose a lot of the complexity when it comes to the cryptographic aspect of it that you had kind of 5-10 years ago when it comes to basically running those systems in across your environment. The speed of the systems that has changed drastically in the past years, and especially if we look at PCI compliance, making sure that you understand access controls, be able to enforce them across your systems is also something that has changed from the past. And I think if we look at a modern way of implementing data-centric security tokenization, those concerns are basically not that relevant anymore. But still, of course, any cybersecurity project comes with some complexity, some understanding needed of what you want to achieve and where you want to, what state you want to have after that project.
Okay, great, thank you. And we have one more question here saying, will PCI dates slip? Are there any delays? So Andras, would you like to take this, or can you share some?
I'm pretty sure there will be some realistic. I mean, these projects, right? These resulting projects are generally huge, right? So it's basically something that, you know, you cannot realistically achieve with all the other competing priorities and other projects out there in the next few years, right? I mean, I'm pretty sure there will be some waivers, exceptions, and kind of realistically adjusted, you know, kind of timelines of projects for implementing these types of projects. So.
Okay, great, thank you. So we don't have any other questions. So that's it. We will now close the session. So thanks a lot to both of you, Andras and Felix. It was really a pleasure talking with you. Thanks for sharing your knowledge with us. Thanks everybody who joined this call. We hope this was interesting and helpful, and you got some valuable insights for your own PCI journey. All the best, and see you soon. Thank you.
Bye.